The flashing red and blue lights cut through the calm of an early Virginia morning, reflecting across the polished black SUV gliding along Interstate 95 just outside Richmond. Traffic slowed almost instinctively as commuters glanced toward the shoulder, expecting another routine stop that would be forgotten before the next exit. But this one would not be forgotten. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Reed, a black man in his late 30s wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, a crisp white dress shirt, and a dark silk tie that remained flawlessly centered despite the sudden interruption. His hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, his breathing steady, his expression unreadable. He looked like any successful professional heading toward an important meeting. Yet the white patrol officer striding toward his window had already reached a very different conclusion. Officer Ethan Walker adjusted his sunglasses as he approached, his badge catching the morning sunlight. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost theatrical, as if he wanted every passing driver to witness who controlled this moment. Before Marcus could even lower the window completely, Walker's voice cut through the silence with an edge that immediately changed the atmosphere. License and registration. Now, Marcus nodded politely without arguing. Of course, officer. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who understood that respect often revealed more than confrontation ever could. He reached carefully toward the center console, announcing every movement before making it. Yet Walker's posture only grew more rigid. His eyes scanned Marcus's tailored clothing, the expensive watch resting beneath his cuff, the leather portfolio on the passenger seat, and finally settled on Marcus himself with unmistakable suspicion. "That's a nice vehicle," Walker remarked with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "Mind telling me how you can afford something like this?" Marcus looked at him for a brief moment before answering. "I work for a living, sir." The response was measured, respectful, and impossible to challenge, yet it seemed to irritate Walker even more. Cars continued passing only a few feet away, while several drivers slowed to watch. A delivery truck rolled by. A family in an SUV glanced through their windows. Someone farther back appeared to raise a cell phone. Walker leaned slightly closer to the driver's window. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus remained composed. "May I ask the reason?" "Because I said so." The words hung heavily between them. For several seconds, neither man moved. The wind swept lightly across the highway, carrying the distant sound of engines and the faint crackle of Walker's shoulder radio. Marcus slowly opened the door exactly as instructed, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. His polished shoes touched the pavement as he stood beside the SUV with quiet dignity. Walker took Marcus's driver's license, studying it longer than necessary before looking back at him. "Marcus Reed," he read aloud. "Funny, you don't exactly look like someone who's headed where you claim you're going." Marcus simply folded his hands in front of him and waited. He did not argue. He did not protest. He merely glanced once toward the dashboard clock inside the SUV. 8:38. Less than 90 minutes remained before a meeting that could change everything. What Officer Walker could not possibly know was that every unnecessary second on this roadside was pulling him closer to a truth that would completely redefine who was actually in charge. Marcus remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his posture relaxed, his hands visible, his eyes following the steady stream of morning traffic flowing past at nearly 65 miles per hour. The cool breeze carried the scent of fresh pavement after an overnight rain, while sunlight gradually burned through the lingering clouds, casting long shadows across the shoulder of the interstate. Most drivers glanced over for only a second before continuing toward another ordinary workday, unaware that what appeared to be a routine traffic stop was quietly drifting towards something far more significant. Officer Ethan Walker circled the sport utility vehicle with exaggerated patience, studying every detail as though he expected the polished exterior itself to reveal a hidden story. He paused beside the rear window, peered inside the cargo area, then walked slowly around to the passenger side where a dark leather portfolio rested neatly on the seat beside a closed laptop bag. He tapped lightly on the glass before looking back at Marcus. "Business trip?" he asked. "Work," Marcus answered calmly. What kind of work? Federal service. Walker tilted his head slightly. Federal service covers a lot of ground. Marcus offered no further explanation. Silence settled between them again, interrupted only by the distant hum of engines and the occasional burst of static from the patrol car radio. Walker seemed almost disappointed by the absence of nervousness. Most people shifted their weight, spoke too quickly, or tried to explain themselves. Marcus did none of those things. He simply waited with remarkable patience, as though time itself had taught him the value of restraint. Walker opened his patrol vehicle and returned carrying a small notepad. "Where are you headed this morning?" "Richmond." "Specific destination?" "A scheduled meeting." "With who?" Marcus looked directly at him without changing his expression. "I believe that information is unrelated to the reason for this stop." Walker smiled faintly, but there was little warmth behind it. "You do not get to decide what is related." Another patrol unit passed slowly in the opposite direction before continuing down the highway. Walker watched it disappear, then returned his attention to Marcus. "You know," he said, "people who cooperate usually make these conversations much easier." Marcus answered with the same measured tone he had maintained from the beginning. "I am cooperating." The response lingered in the morning air longer than either man expected. Walker looked down once more at the driver's license, still resting in his hand. Everything about it checked out. The registration matched. The insurance information was current. There were no warrants, no alerts, no violations that justified extending the stop. Yet something about Marcus seemed to challenge assumptions Walker had carried for years, and instead of recognizing his own uncertainty, he interpreted it as suspicion. Several hundred yards away, an unmarked black sport utility vehicle merged quietly onto the interstate before maintaining a steady distance behind the patrol car. A second dark vehicle followed a minute later, blending naturally into traffic without attracting attention. Marcus noticed neither vehicle directly. He simply glanced once more toward the digital clock glowing faintly through his windshield. 8:43. 5 more minutes had slipped away. Somewhere beyond the next exit, dozens of professionals were preparing for a briefing that had been planned for months with careful precision. Phones had been secured. Secure conference rooms had been reserved. Sensitive files waited unopened. Every minute mattered. Walker stepped closer again, folding his arms. "I think I'm going to take a longer look at this situation." Marcus met his eyes with quiet confidence, showing neither frustration nor fear. "That is your decision, officer." Neither man realized that the next vehicle approaching from the south would quietly change the direction of the entire morning. Marcus watched without expression as Officer Ethan Walker continued, inspecting the vehicle with growing determination, as though refusing to accept that an ordinary traffic stop could remain exactly that. The interstate kept moving around them in an endless rhythm of commuters, delivery vans, and tractor-trailers, each driver carrying a destination that suddenly seemed far less complicated than the one waiting on the shoulder. Somewhere nearby, a mockingbird called from a line of trees beyond the guardrail, almost drowning out the distant crackle of Walker's radio. The peaceful sound contrasted sharply with the tension that had settled between the two men. Walker returned to the driver's side, holding Marcus's license between 2 fingers. "You still have not told me exactly what kind of federal service you work in." Marcus met his gaze calmly. "I travel where I am assigned." Walker narrowed his eyes. "That is not an answer. It is the answer I am authorized to give." For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed the officer's face. He had expected defensiveness, excuses, perhaps even anger. Instead, Marcus answered every question with remarkable composure, never raising his voice, never showing disrespect, never giving Walker the reaction he appeared to be searching for. Imagine standing there on the side of a busy American highway, surrounded by strangers who know nothing about your life, your career, or the responsibilities resting on your shoulders, yet realizing that none of those things matter because someone has already decided who you are before hearing a single word you say. Marcus understood that feeling better than most. Years of federal service had taught him that patience was often more powerful than pride. He had learned that remaining calm could reveal more about another person's character than any argument ever could. Walker walked toward the passenger side once again, stopping beside the closed leather portfolio visible through the window. "What is inside the case?" he asked. "Work documents." "Open the vehicle." Marcus remained respectful. "Those documents are protected under federal procedures." Walker let out a quiet laugh. "Federal procedures. That sounds important." Marcus said nothing. The silence itself seemed to frustrate the officer more than any disagreement could have. A woman driving a silver sedan slowed as she passed, glancing toward the scene before continuing down the highway. Moments later, another commuter drove by with a dashboard camera pointed forward, recording everything occurring naturally on the roadside. None of them knew they were witnessing moments that would soon be reviewed far beyond this stretch of interstate. Marcus's phone, resting inside the center console, vibrated softly for the third time that morning. The screen briefly illuminated before fading again. Walker noticed the movement through the window. "Expecting an important call?" Marcus answered honestly. "Several. Then they can wait." Marcus nodded once. "Perhaps." He glanced briefly toward the dashboard clock. 8:48. Every passing minute quietly reshaped schedules far beyond this highway. Inside a federal building in Richmond, secure conference room doors remained closed while senior officials waited for one final arrival before beginning an operation. Months in the making. Nobody inside that building expressed concern yet. They simply trusted that Marcus Reed would appear exactly when he was supposed to. That trust had been earned through years of discipline, professionalism, and calm judgment under pressure. Back on the roadside, Walker folded the license and registration together before slipping them into his notebook instead of returning them. "I think we're going to stay here a little longer," he said. Marcus looked at him steadily, his expression unchanged despite the delay. "That decision will have consequences, officer." Walker smirked confidently. "For who?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted past the patrol car toward the approaching traffic where two identical black sport utility vehicles had quietly exited the interstate and were now turning onto the shoulder several hundred feet behind them. Their arrival so subtle that Walker had not noticed them at all. The two black sport utility vehicles came to a smooth stop several hundred feet behind the patrol car without lights or sirens, blending naturally into the flow of the morning as though they belonged there all along. Their engines remained running, but no one stepped out. To passing drivers, they looked like ordinary government vehicles parked for routine business. Officer Ethan Walker never glanced in their direction. His attention remained fixed entirely on Marcus Reed, convinced that whatever answers he was searching for would eventually appear if he kept pressing long enough. Marcus stood quietly beside his vehicle, his navy suit untouched despite the breeze sweeping across the shoulder, his white shirt crisp beneath the morning sun, his tie perfectly straight. He looked less like someone being questioned and more like someone patiently waiting for a delayed appointment. That calm only deepened Walker's frustration. "Unlock the vehicle," Walker said again. Marcus answered with the same measured voice that had never once risen above conversation. "Officer, I have complied with every lawful instruction you have given me." Walker folded his arms. "Then you should not have any problem cooperating a little more." Marcus looked directly at him. Cooperation and unlimited access are not the same thing. The words were respectful, but they carried quiet certainty. Walker took another step closer. "You think you know the law?" Marcus paused before replying. "I believe everyone benefits when the law is applied fairly." For a brief moment, neither man spoke. The only sounds came from the interstate, where the steady stream of vehicles continued rolling south toward Richmond. A pickup truck slowed slightly as the driver looked across the shoulder. Another commuter lowered a window for a better look before continuing on. A teenager riding in the back seat of a family vehicle pointed toward the patrol car while holding up a phone. None of them knew that dozens of cameras, both public and private, were quietly preserving every minute of the encounter from different angles. Walker finally broke the silence. "You have been unusually confident since I stopped you." Marcus answered honestly. "Confidence comes from knowing I have done nothing wrong." Walker smiled with visible disbelief. "Everybody says that." Marcus gently shook his head. "Not everybody means it." The reply lingered longer than Walker expected. Instead of escalating the conversation, Marcus had simply reflected the truth as he understood it. There was no sarcasm, no hostility, only remarkable composure. It was the kind of self-control built over years of experience, the kind that cannot be learned in a single training course or practiced only when life is easy. Walker looked once more toward the dark leather portfolio resting on the passenger seat. He wanted answers hidden inside that vehicle, answers that would justify every assumption he had already made. Yet assumptions have a way of becoming heavier each time evidence refuses to support them. Marcus's phone vibrated again inside the center console. This time it continued for several seconds before stopping. Walker noticed it immediately. Someone seems anxious to reach you. Marcus glanced briefly toward the dashboard before returning his attention to the officer. Someone is probably wondering why I am late. Walker gave a dismissive shrug. Then they will keep wondering. Marcus looked toward the horizon where sunlight reflected across the interstate. Perhaps not for much longer. Behind Walker, one of the black sport utility vehicles quietly opened its driver's door. A man in a charcoal suit stepped onto the shoulder with calm purpose, followed moments later by another professionally dressed individual carrying a slim leather folder. They exchanged no unnecessary words, no hurried gestures, only brief nods before walking steadily toward the patrol car. Walker remained completely unaware. His back was still turned toward the approaching figures, while Marcus watched them with the same composed expression he had maintained since the very beginning, knowing that the next few minutes would answer every question without requiring him to raise his voice. Even once Marcus watched the two approaching figures without changing his expression, offering no sign that he recognized them. To anyone else, they looked like experienced professionals walking with quiet purpose along the shoulder of the interstate. They wore dark business suits instead of uniforms, each carrying themselves with the calm confidence of people who never needed to announce their authority. Officer Ethan Walker remained focused on Marcus, still unaware that the scene around him had begun to change. "You seem remarkably patient," Walker observed. Marcus answered with the same steady tone that had guided every word since the stop began. "Patience is usually a better investment than assumptions." Walker gave a brief laugh. "That sounds rehearsed." "It sounds experienced," Marcus replied. The response was simple, yet it carried enough weight to leave a brief silence between them. The morning traffic continued flowing south, sunlight reflecting across windshields as commuters passed the scene without realizing that the balance of authority was already shifting. One of the suited men stopped several yards away beside the unmarked sport utility vehicle, speaking quietly into a small communication device clipped beneath his jacket. The second checked his watch before scanning the highway with practiced awareness. Neither interrupted the traffic stop. Neither called out. They simply waited. Marcus glanced once toward the dashboard clock inside his vehicle. 8:54. The operation scheduled in Richmond had already adjusted to his delay. Somewhere inside a secure federal conference room, senior officials had postponed the briefing instead of beginning without him. No frustration, no panique, just confidence that the person they were waiting for had a reason. Walker noticed the glance toward the clock and interpreted it differently. "Running out of time?" he asked. Marcus smiled politely for the first time that morning. Time has a way of revealing what matters. Walker looked unconvinced. He opened his notepad once more, pretending to review information that he had already checked several times. Everything remained exactly as before. The driver's license was valid. The registration matched. The insurance was current. There were no outstanding warrants, no alerts, no legal justification for extending the stop. Yet instead of accepting the evidence in front of him, he continued searching for evidence that did not exist. Imagine believing so strongly in your first impression that every fact afterward feels like an inconvenience instead of a lesson. That quiet struggle was unfolding inside Walker, though he could not yet recognize it. Marcus understood something different. Experience had taught him that integrity often required standing still while someone else decided whether they would follow the law they had sworn to uphold. His phone vibrated once again inside the center console before finally falling silent. Seconds later, One of the men near the unmarked vehicles received a call instead. He listened carefully, nodded once, then looked directly toward Marcus before closing the phone. The message had clearly been expected. The man adjusted his suit jacket and began walking with measured confidence toward the patrol car, accompanied by his colleague. Their pace remained calm, neither hurried nor hesitant. Walker finally noticed movement behind him and turned slightly, his expression shifting from irritation to curiosity. The two men continued approaching until they were only a few yards away, their polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel shoulder. Neither displayed a badge. Neither introduced himself immediately. They simply stopped beside the patrol car with composed professionalism, exchanging a brief glance with Marcus before looking toward Officer Walker. The morning breeze carried complete silence across the highway for one long moment, and although no voices had yet been raised, it suddenly felt as though every passing vehicle, every roadside camera, and every witness had become part of a conversation that was about to take an unexpected turn. Officer Ethan Walker straightened his posture as the two suited men came to a stop beside the patrol car. His confidence remained intact, supported by the belief that he was simply dealing with another routine interruption. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, keeping one hand on his duty belt. The older of the two men offered a courteous nod before reaching into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket. Instead of moving quickly, he did everything with deliberate precision, allowing Walker to clearly see each motion. He produced a leather credential wallet and opened it just long enough for the federal identification inside to become unmistakable. Walker's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, officer," the man said evenly. "Special Agent Daniel Foster." He gestured politely toward his colleague. "Special Agent Olivia Grant." Neither raised their voice. Neither challenged Walker. Their calm professionalism carried more authority than any display of emotion ever could. Walker glanced briefly at Marcus before returning his attention to the credentials. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Foster answered without hesitation. "We are here because our supervisory agent has not arrived at a scheduled federal briefing, and we trace the delay to this location." Walker frowned. "Your supervisory agent?" Foster turned slightly toward Marcus. "Yes." For the first time that morning, Walker looked at Marcus with genuine uncertainty instead of suspicion. Marcus remained exactly where he had been standing, hands relaxed, jacket buttoned, his composed expression unchanged despite everything that had unfolded over the past several minutes. Foster continued speaking in the same measured tone. "Agent Reed has been leading a multi-agency investigation involving federal and local coordination for several months. Today's briefing cannot begin until he arrives." The words settled heavily into the quiet morning air. Passing traffic continued without interruption, yet the atmosphere on the shoulder of the highway had transformed completely. Walker looked back down at the driver's license still resting inside his notebook. The name had never been false. Every document had been authentic. Every answer Marcus had given had been truthful. The only thing that had been incorrect was the story Walker had created in his own mind before asking the first question. Marcus finally spoke, his voice remaining calm and respectful. "Officer, I told you I was traveling for federal work." Walker hesitated before answering. "You did. I also told you I was cooperating." Walker lowered his eyes briefly. "Yes." There was no satisfaction in Marcus's voice, no hint of revenge, only quiet honesty. Foster extended one hand politely. "Officer, may we have Agent Reed's identification and travel documents returned so we may continue to Richmond?" Walker looked at the paperwork for a moment longer before carefully handing everything back to Marcus. Marcus accepted the documents with a simple nod of appreciation before placing them neatly inside his jacket. Olivia Grant stepped toward the sport utility vehicle and opened the passenger door after Marcus unlocked it remotely. She retrieved the dark leather portfolio with obvious familiarity, carrying it carefully as though its contents mattered far beyond anything visible from the outside. Walker watched silently. Questions filled his mind faster than he could ask them. Marcus turned toward the approaching federal vehicles, But before taking a single step, he paused and looked back at Walker. "This morning was never about proving who I was," he said quietly. "It was about whether every person receives the same fairness before anyone knows who they are." No accusation followed. No lecture. Just one simple sentence that lingered longer than the sound of passing traffic. As Marcus walked toward the waiting agents, additional unmarked vehicles began arriving from the interstate exit, each carrying professionals dressed in business attire, each acknowledging Marcus with respectful nods, making it unmistakably clear that the man who had quietly stood on the roadside all morning had never been waiting for authority to arrive, because he had been carrying it with him the entire time. Marcus accepted the leather portfolio from Special Agent Olivia Grant with a quiet nod before opening it, just enough to confirm that every document remained exactly where it belonged. He closed it again without hurry, as though the interruption had been nothing more than an unexpected delay in an otherwise carefully planned morning. Around him, more unmarked federal vehicles eased onto the shoulder in an orderly line, their arrivals calm and deliberate. Men and women dressed in business suits stepped out one after another, each carrying identification cases, tablets, or secure document bags instead of displaying any unnecessary show of authority. As they approached, their greetings were immediate and consistent. "Good morning, Agent Reed." "Good morning, sir. The conference room is secure and ready whenever you arrive." Marcus acknowledged each greeting with a brief smile and a simple nod. There was no ceremony, no dramatic announcement, only the quiet respect that comes from years of earned leadership. Officer Ethan Walker remained beside his patrol car, watching the scene unfold with growing disbelief. The same man he had viewed with suspicion less than 20 minutes earlier was now clearly directing the attention of experienced federal personnel who treated his arrival as the final piece of a carefully coordinated operation. Foster glanced toward Marcus. "The Richmond team has postponed the briefing. Everyone is waiting for your instructions." Marcus looked at his watch before answering. "Notify them that we will begin as soon as we arrive. Thank them for their patience." "Already done, sir," Foster replied. Olivia handed Marcus a secure mobile device that had been powered down during travel. Within seconds, the screen illuminated with several waiting messages from senior officials across multiple agencies. Marcus reviewed them calmly before responding to only one. "Running behind schedule. Arrival in approximately 35 minutes. Proceed with preparation." He returned the device to Olivia without unnecessary discussion. Everything about the exchange reflected quiet efficiency. Walker could not help noticing that no one questioned Marcus's judgment, interrupted his decisions, or sought approval over his instructions. Leadership had revealed itself without a single speech. Imagine discovering that true authority rarely needs to announce itself because everyone around it already recognizes it. That realization settled heavily over the roadside as the federal team continued preparing for departure. Marcus finally turned back toward Walker one last time. His expression remained composed, free from anger or satisfaction. "Officer Walker," he said politely, "I understand that traffic stops are part of your responsibility. Public safety matters. Every community depends on professional officers who carry out that responsibility fairly." Walker listened silently. Marcus continued, "The challenge comes when assumptions begin replacing facts. Once that happens, every honest conversation becomes more difficult than it needs to be." Walker lowered his eyes for a moment before answering quietly, "I understand." Marcus held his gaze with steady professionalism. "I hope you do, because the next person you stop may never have the opportunity to explain who they are, and they should never have to." The words carried no accusation. They sounded more like advice from someone who genuinely believed people could choose differently tomorrow than they had chosen today. Foster approached with the vehicle keys. "Everything is ready, sir." Marcus accepted them before extending one final courteous nod toward Walker. "Have a safe day, officer." Without waiting for a response, he entered the driver's seat of the black sport utility vehicle while the federal convoy organized itself behind him with practiced precision. As the engines started one by one, Walker remained standing beside his patrol car, watching the convoy. merged smoothly back onto Interstate 95. Only after the last vehicle disappeared into the morning traffic did he fully appreciate the lesson the highway had quietly delivered. The man he had spent the morning trying to measure had never once needed to prove his importance because genuine character had spoken long before anyone revealed his title. By the time Marcus Reed arrived at the Federal Operations Center in Richmond, the delay on the interstate had already become part of the morning briefing. Inside the secure conference room, representatives from multiple federal agencies sat around a long, polished table, reviewing timelines, investigative summaries, and coordination plans that had taken months to assemble. The atmosphere remained disciplined, yet everyone noticed the extra minutes that had quietly shifted the schedule. Marcus entered without drawing attention to himself, placed the leather portfolio on the table, and apologized only for the delay. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "Let's get to work." No one asked why he had been late. They had already received enough information to understand that circumstances outside his control had interrupted his arrival. The meeting proceeded exactly as planned, with Marcus calmly guiding discussions, assigning responsibilities, and confirming operational details with the confidence of someone who understood every piece of the larger picture. Hundreds of miles of investigative work, countless interviews, and extensive cooperation between agencies all depended on professionalism, discipline, and trust. Meanwhile, back at the Highway Patrol Station, Officer Ethan Walker completed the paperwork from the traffic stop. As he reviewed the report, he realized how ordinary the written facts appeared compared to the assumptions that had shaped his decisions. The driver's license had been valid. The registration had matched the vehicle. Insurance had been current. No violations had justified extending the encounter beyond its original purpose. Before he could finish organizing the file, his supervisor approached carrying a tablet. "Walker, I need you in the conference room." The request sounded routine, but the expression on the supervisor's face suggested otherwise. Inside the room, several command staff members were already seated. A monitor displayed synchronized footage collected from multiple sources, including the patrol vehicle recording, body camera video, and highway traffic cameras positioned along the interstate. Every conversation, every instruction, and every minute of the encounter had been preserved exactly as it happened. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody rushed to judgment. The review focused only on facts, sequence, and professional standards. Walker watched himself asking repeated questions after documentation had already confirmed Marcus's identity. He saw the unnecessary delay. He heard Marcus answering respectfully each time without raising his voice. Most striking of all was the contrast between the calm professionalism shown throughout the encounter and the assumptions that had quietly shaped Walker's decisions. His supervisor paused the recording before speaking. "This review is not about one conversation. It is about whether our actions consistently reflect the standards the public expects from us." The room remained silent. Another administrator added, "Professional judgment requires evidence, not impressions. Every person deserves the same fairness regardless of appearance, occupation, or background." Walker listened without interruption. There were no dramatic accusations, no public humiliation, only a careful examination of choices that could have been different. Outside the conference room, routine work at the station continued as always. Phone hung. Officers prepared for patrol. Reports were filed. Yet inside that room, one ordinary traffic stop had become an important reminder that accountability often arrives quietly through documentation rather than confrontation. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a brief call from Special Agent Daniel Foster updating him on the progress of the day's operation. Before ending the conversation, Foster mentioned that the traffic stop was already being reviewed through the appropriate administrative process. Marcus paused for only a moment before answering. "Good. Let the facts speak for themselves." He offered no additional comments, requested no special treatment, and expressed no interest in personal retaliation. For Marcus, the purpose had never been winning an argument on the side of the highway. It had always been something much larger than that. Justice was strongest when it relied on truth, consistent standards, and the quiet courage to examine every decision with honesty, Even when the evidence challenged the conclusions people had reached too quickly, several weeks passed before the events from that quiet morning on Interstate 95 faded from the daily headlines inside the agencies involved. But the lesson remained remarkably clear for everyone who had witnessed it. The administrative review concluded through established procedures, relying on documented evidence, recorded conversations, and professional standards rather than assumptions or emotion. Recommendations focused on additional training, objective decision-making, and reinforcing the responsibility every officer carries when exercising public authority. It was not a story about revenge. It became a story about accountability, reflection, and the opportunity to do better. Marcus Reed never spoke publicly about the traffic stop. When colleagues occasionally mentioned it, he gently redirected the conversation back toward the mission that had always mattered most. Cases still needed to be solved. Communities still depended on cooperation between local departments and federal investigators. Trust, once weakened, could only be restored through consistent actions instead of memorable speeches. That belief shaped every decision Marcus made. One quiet afternoon, while leaving the federal building after another long meeting, Marcus noticed a familiar patrol vehicle parked across the street. Officer Ethan Walker stepped out, no longer carrying the confidence that had defined their first encounter. He approached slowly and stopped several feet away. "Agent Reed," he said respectfully. Marcus turned with the same calm expression he had shown from the beginning. "Good afternoon, officer." Walker hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking about that morning for a long time." Marcus listened without interruption. "I reviewed every recording more than once," Walker continued. "The facts never changed. Only my perspective did." For a moment, the city noise seemed to fade beneath the steady rhythm of passing traffic. Walker took a slow breath. "I cannot change how I first saw you, but I can change how I see the next person." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That decision belongs to you every single day." Walker extended his hand. "I appreciate that you allowed the process to work instead of making it personal." Marcus accepted the handshake with quiet sincerity. Respect for the law means trusting it to correct mistakes whenever possible. Neither man said anything further for several seconds. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations require very few words. As Walker returned to his patrol vehicle, he paused before opening the door and looked back once more. The expression on his face no longer reflected certainty born from assumptions. It reflected humility earned through experience. Marcus watched him drive away before turning toward the federal building, where another investigation, another meeting, and another opportunity to serve the public already awaited. Life moved forward exactly as it always had, yet something important had changed beneath the surface. Imagine how different every community could become if people were judged by their actions before they were judged by their appearance. Imagine how many unnecessary conflicts could disappear if patience replaced prejudice and evidence came before conclusions. Those questions remained long after the roadside encounter had ended because they reached beyond one officer, one agent, or one highway outside Richmond. They belonged to everyone willing to listen. Marcus never needed to remind people of his position because genuine leadership had revealed itself through dignity, restraint, and unwavering professionalism. Officer Walker never forgot that the most important lesson from that morning had nothing to do with federal authority or official titles. It was about recognizing the humanity standing in front of you before deciding who that person must be. A badge may grant responsibility, a title may carry authority, and a uniform may represent service. But character is revealed only by the choices made when no one expects a lesson to be learned. That morning, one man carried a badge, another carried quiet integrity, and in the end it was integrity that left the deepest impression of all. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.